was born and brought up in Delhi. I studied undergraduate in my undergraduate studies. I did a management course from Delhi University, and then in my first job was with a management consulting firm, a boutique firm based out of Saudi Arabia. That I spent about a year there and then moved to Goldman Sachs. I was already pursuing my CFA back then and I wanted to get into hardcore finance. So I moved to Goldman Sachs Bangalore and I joined their investment banking division. I spent about 2 years there working on various M&A transactions and working across multiple industries. And then I sort of took a U-turn. I was not really feeling fulfilled with being in the service industry. I wanted to be closer to the on-ground action. So I decided to move on to healthcare management, and I took up this role with a company called Nephroplus, which is Asia's largest network of dialysis centers. So they operate dialysis centers in hospitals like Fortis, Max, Medanta, and as well as government hospitals. So I joined in and I took up the role of a pharmacy business head there. I was managing the Pan India pharma business for them, and then I spent about 3 years there, and that was a tough time during COVID, wherein dialysis being an essential service, it was something that all other medical departments were actually shut during that time, but we had to be there on ground and make sure that everyone who was taking dialysis with us was there. Was We had access? They had access to facilities. So at that point of time, I had a lot of learning, and after that, I spent about a year at this company called Akums, which is India's largest contract manufacturer for pharmaceutical products. It manufactures products for all leading companies, Cipla, Dr. Reddy, Sun Pharma, and I was in the CEO office in a strategy role, and that was another amazing experience. Wanted to be in the management space, and then MBA was the route to that, and I that was the most popular course at that time. The first time when I got into an MBA admit was back in my undergraduate days when I got into a 5 year integrated program at IIM Indore. But I did not want to restrict myself to India, and that point of time I gave up that option. I took up a 3 year course in undergraduate in Delhi University, and then that was a tough decision at that point of time because my parents were so hell bent on sending me there because that IIM name was stuck in their head. So that was the first time, and then in my final year, I got through ISB under the YLP program. If you're familiar with that, the Young Leaders program, wherein you get in your final year and then you have to complete 2 years of WorkX and then you join the MBA program. So I was at Goldman Sachs back then. I was enjoying my job a bit, and then again, I had that dream of doing it abroad. So I deferred it for a year, held on to that admit, but then the difficult decision came where they did not let me defer it for the second time. So I had to let go of that. Uh, my motivations for doing an MBA is that I come from a family business where my father has his own business, but that I never found it to interest myself. I mean, it is an engineering components business, a manufacturing business. I could have easily walked into that office and then started on a journey there, but that was not something that I had a calling for, and I had to build a name for myself and make recognition for myself. So I felt that and that agreement between me and my father that I was not going to join his business happened very early on. So that is the reason he also wanted to push me to get an MBA as soon as possible, and then that that aspiration of getting into the corporate world and making a name for myself was the first thought of doing an MBA. And then when I was about 4 or 5 years into my career, when I actually started working hard for it, at that point of time, I felt that there was a ceiling that I was already looking at, and that ceiling was visible to me without an MBA. So, in order to break that ceiling, I think that MBA was a good option according to me. In terms of studying abroad, I think I've always been a person. If I was up, if life had everything that I wanted, or if everything was going according to me, I am a person who would have spent, let's say, 5 years in one country and then 5 years in another country. So, in order to build that international career, I wanted to. I think it was an essential requirement that I go for an MBA and get my MBA at a recognized brand that is probably recognized all over the world. So I'm hoping that probably after INSEAD, I can continue on that dream of working in multiple countries over the years. Let's see what happens. I think the first step was GMAT in my case because my GMAT had already expired and I already had a very low score, so I had to bring it up and take a second GMAT attempt at that point of time. So I started when I started with trying to do it on my own, but I was not able to build that routine. Being in that corporate rat for the last 3 4 years, I felt that I wanted to put myself in a structure, and I ended up joining an institute and where I spent about I was used to visit them on weekends, and then at that point of time, that is when I was able to build that routine, and I started working on the GMAT more seriously. And more than the classes, I think the structured manner of training helped me a bit in terms of what resources I need to look at, because I did not have someone who told me that do this, and you will get through the exam. So more than the classes, more than the conceptual part of the training, I think it was more about how to go about the self-study part of it that helped me a lot more. And I ended up doing what was required. And then at a point of time, after that, once I had my GMAT score, I think in terms of the application process, because I had applied to schools earlier, I had gotten through IIM Indore. I think that was not an application oriented process, but ISB definitely was. So at that point of time, I knew I was familiar with the process. So I decided that I will not be investing a lot of money on this activity. It was an expensive affair. I did all the research wherein there were consultants who were charging very low and some that were international consultants that were charging really high. But I decided to do that on my own because I felt that it was a lot more personal aspect, and I had understood what the point of view from an admission committee point of view what was required. So I decided to work on that on my own, and then in terms of the schools that I chose to apply to, there were about 4 or 5 schools that I had shortlisted. So I applied for three of them together in the first go, and then waited for the results. And then so the process of writing an application, I think, is something that is a lot of iterations, and you need to be critical of yourself, because if you're doing it on your own, you can take opinions from multiple people, but at the end of the day, you need to trust your own decision and you need to be critical of yourself. And that is exactly what I did. I wrote one essay, and then there were multiple times when I wrote the entire thing and then just scrapped it off because I was not feeling happy about it. So that is when multiple rounds of iterations happened, and if I talk about the INSEAD application in particular, there were about 7 or 8 questions that had about 250 to 500 words that were supposed to be written. So I think I wrote those seven questions, I think approximately 3 or 4 times on an average. So that is what helps a lot, and refining your own work will make it uh, I think, more attractive from an admission committee point of view and more structured and clear. I think the goal of the application is to make sure that they understand you as a person very clearly and understand your motivations. So I started looking at my work from that point of view, and that is what helped me in the iteration process. For the INSEAD application and for most B schools, I think two recommendations are required, and I had done approximately 4 jobs at that point. In my total career journey, I have done about 4 jobs, so I had an option. I wanted to give a diverse mix where I could represent something maybe from consulting and banking, and then from the healthcare space. So I chose that consulting would be a good fit, and I had an amazing relationship with my manager at that point of time. So he wrote one recommendation for me, and then being in the healthcare space, I wanted to give more flavor to the application around the healthcare space, because that is what I plan to do after my MBA as well. I want to stick to the healthcare space. So the second recommendation was from my manager in the first healthcare job that I did. So that is how I went about it. And Yes, for INSEAD there were two different interviews, and both of them were alumni interviews. So one of my interviews was with a partner at Bain, uh, who was a very old alumni who had passed out, I think, from INSEAD in about 90 to 95 or maybe before 2000. So that was a very senior person who was doing that interview. And at that point of time, that interview was something that happened over a Zoom call, and there were multiple disconnections that were happening during that time. I think, I don't know. So I got pretty nervous during that interview, but I knew my story very well, and I had done a lot of practice in terms of knowing what my story was and narrating it in a certain way that the interviewer was engaged. So even after getting nervous because of those disconnections, I was able to engage the interviewer and communicate an interesting story to him. And then I think an interview at that point of time, it felt more like a conversation after that, because once that initial after the 5 to 7 minutes of that interview, the interviewer made me feel very comfortable. He was a very senior person, an old person, and but he made me feel very relaxed and comfortable, and that went on very smoothly after that. It was more of an interaction on the motivations that I had and what goals that I wanted to achieve after an MBA. And my second interview was with a more recent alumni who was from the pharma space, as I was working in the healthcare sector and more particularly the pharma space. So they matched me up with someone who had experience in that industry, and that was an interview again, more like a conversation, because these are not professional interviewers, if I may call it. Definitely do a lot of interviews, but it is more like an alumni engagement that they are doing with the school. So it was again a very nice conversation that I had. Got to learn a lot from her, because that interview lasted for about, I think it was supposed to be 40 45 minutes is what I had heard. That was the average time, but that interview lasted about 90 minutes for her. So I think if I had to change one thing, I would change it to a point wherein I was a little. I had a very broad list of schools that I wanted to apply to. I was not very focused on the geography. I was going after the rankings rather than what I exactly wanted to achieve, and what were my constraints in terms of time. So I spent a lot of time exploring applications for USB schools, and I did think of submitting all of those applications. I started writing. I think I did approximately 50 to 70% of the application for three US schools as well, and then I decided that I did not want to do that. So I think I would advise people who are looking at the MBA application process. I think first narrow down your options in terms of what do you want to do, and do not just go after the rankings. It is something that your career is not going to be based on rankings. It is going to be based on probably the location where you want to settle post your MBA. That is an important factor that will drive. Then the second factor that was the most important for me was the amount of time that I wanted to give to an MBA. uh, uh, People probably start comparing a 1 year and a 2 year MBA just on the basis of the cost. I think of the cost or the tuition fee, and I feel that tuition fee is just a minute aspect of it. What you are going through, what you are going letting go during that time period is your salary that you would have earned, or the profits that you would have made in any business while doing that at that point of time. So that, I think, is an important consideration that people need to factor in, and accordingly choose what would be the best suited program for them. And then obviously there are multiple schools that are associated with multiple industries. If I talk about INSEAD is something that is very dearly associated with consulting, and it is primarily known as a consulting B school.